No jokes?
Okay, welcome everyone. I'm here with Dr. Michael Hynes, who's the superintendent of the Shelter Island School District. He's also my boss and a man and a leader who I respect very much. And I wanted to thank you very much for being here, Mike. And I wanted to start this off with a nice, easy question for you. In what year was your doctorate granted?
It was granted in 2006.
Oh, 2006. Oh, nice. And it was on parental involvement in schools?
It was on parental involvement in schools, and interesting enough, going through the process of deciding what the topic would be, I changed my mind probably 3 times, and luckily for me, I had a great design specialist who worked with me and allowed me to narrow it down. And parental involvement at the time, where I was in my life as far as administration is concerned, it was very, very important to me, and it ended up really helping me out.
Oh, nice. Can you name the design?
That would be Dr. Alan Serra.
Oh, very nice, very nice.
That's great.
We've been talking about it in class. Have you found, you kind of touched on it there, your research applicable to your work?
I would say research I think is a very important part of
and the whole process.
It's really the process. I would say if you break it down into 2 different parts, it's the writing of the dissertation itself, and then it's the classes that one takes. And both were extremely, extremely important in my development, not only as an administrator, but certainly as a person. So walking into my first class, gosh, back in 2003,
wow.
which seems like it's 10 years ago, really. It's interesting, it goes so fast, is that I really came from a place of not knowing, or thinking I knew everything, but realizing the more that you know, the more you really don't know.
Right,
So
yeah,
I
right.
had, and I said this before with you and our staff, is, really coming in with horse blinders on and not knowing what else was out there.
Mm-hmm.
What the program did for me was really allow myself to go from here to really open up completely 180. And at some point, I'm hoping to get to 360 degrees.
Right.
And so it was very helpful. So the coursework was great. It provided a great foundation for the underpinnings of different theorists that are out there, current and certainly those who were around long ago. And then the process of the dissertation writing really honed my writing skills, and then the rigor, and then really the longitudinal nature of working on something for more than 10 minutes, or a month. So you're working on this project for a very long time, and so that resiliency factor really comes into play.
Sure.
And I think that's really what makes or break those who are successful in completing one's dissertation. It's you have that component of how resilient are you, and that tenacity, and sticking to something, especially when you meet with your professors over time, and they ask you to change this and change that and change this.
Right.
And it's very easy to go into your own cocoon and feel sorry for yourself and say, there is no light at the end of this tunnel.
Right.
And so, but that's life. Life is
sure.
It's these things happen all the time. So that resiliency factor is really important, and I think that's really what separates those who finish and those who don't.
And those who don't, right. Oh, very, very interesting. Now, if you wouldn't mind, could you give us just a general work history, where you were maybe when you started the program,
Sure.
and where you are now?
Yeah, when I started the program, I was a teacher, believe it or not, like yourself actually.
Wow.
And very quickly, once I started taking my courses, I actually went through the ranks of administration. Excuse me. I was an assistant principal, elementary principal, and then I moved on to being a principal of an elementary school.
Wow.
And then I moved to being a principal of a middle school, an assistant principal of a middle school, not in that order, but I ran the gamut as far as administration.
Right.
And I really believe because of this program, it allowed me to take these steps
Right.
so
Pretty
quickly.
quick, yeah, right.
Very quick,
yeah.
very quickly. And then actually I became assistant superintendent out in Plainedge in North Massapequa. And then here I am in Shelter.
Here you are.
Working with you.
This is Dr. Hynes' third year here,
Yes.
going into our third year, and he just to let you guys know, he just did grant me tenure, so.
Well,
thank you
you
very
granted
much.
yourself tenure, but thank you. You certainly deserved it.
This is a bit of a broad question, but how would you evaluate success?
Evaluate success. Such a simple question. I guess I would evaluate it in a few different ways. I think it really depends. The nature of the question is geared toward personal and professional, so I'll stick to professional. Now, anything that I do long term always has a design to it, has a timeline to it, has benchmarks along the way, and so whatever the goal is that whatever you have in mind, or maybe multiple goals or sub goals within that large one, is did you achieve those goals, and more importantly, did you have others assisting you? I shouldn't even say assist you, working with you to get to where you needed to be, because when you go through that process of whatever that success may have been, if you achieve those goals, it's understanding and appreciating the journey along the way.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas before, I like to go from first to fifth gear.
Right,
And
right.
not really, I'd say enjoy the process, but appreciate the process of getting to wherever it is that you needed to go. But the whole part, or the context of bringing people on board, those who are on board who are not doing a good job, getting them off the bus, as Jim Collins would say, and then continue to move forward. And again, in this process, evaluating where you are at certain points in time, and if you're not, how do you readjust? What are the things that you need to do? And then getting to the end. And getting to the end, for me, the ultimate benchmark success, I'll use an example, is looking at our seniors who just graduated.
Right, yeah, sure.
So were they prepared? Were they ready? What were the exit outcomes met over time? And if not, what do we need to readjust for the following year?
Right.
And so it's always, success is so fleeting. It happens so quickly, and then once you're done, you move on to the next thing.
Right. I know on that note too, for the first time I think in the school's history, this year you actually looked at where our seniors are doing, or their thoughts on things in college, where they are.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah, what we did this year for the first time here is, first of all, just talking to our students and asking a very simple question or questions. What's working well, what's not working well. I think Demi would appreciate that, because you're finding out from the, really the workers, as far as, what you're doing it for,
Mm-hmm.
as far as what's happening, what's not happening. But then those who went through the system, finding out 3, 4, 5 years after they left here, what helped them, what didn't help them,
Right.
and then what recommendations you have.
Right.
And then once we actually receive those recommendations, how do we put that into a plan to move that forward?
Right.
And so, yeah, this is the first time we've
And we're
done
in the
that.
moving forward.
And
phase
we are in
now,
the
yeah.
moving forward
Yeah.
at light speed phase, which is okay. And as Carver would say, with the iceberg is melting. I'm not saying it's melting here. I think at this point, though, it's important to notice that there are things that need to be improved. And
Right.
that's a whole other conversation for probably another day. Or maybe another question. I don't know.
Do you think leaders, and maybe you could talk about yourself in this, are born, or do you think they grow, out of learning?
It's probably the safest answer, but I really believe it. I think it's both. I think there are probably some inherent qualities that one has within their DNA that enables them to be successful in different arenas. And I also think there are skill sets that one can learn, specifically at Dowling in the program that you're in right now. It certainly helped me. When I was a teacher, I didn't think I would become some sort of leader of a building, even though I always thought my way was the right way. And I always felt that I could do a better job than somebody else was doing. But I think it's both. And I think,
Right.
there's a lot of things that are latent within oneself that you need the right person to poke and prod
Right.
to open that up.
Right.
So I really do think it's both. And I think the person needs to be willing to really understand that you continually grow every single day as a leader.
Sure.
And leadership really, I don't think it's that complicated, because it's really all about, if you would, I don't know if it's a question you have, but if you were to define leadership, it's really as simple as influencing others. And that's really it.
Mm-hmm.
Maxwell says that. He talks about leadership is influence, nothing more. And so how do you influence people who traditionally may not want to do something, And even though they may not agree with you, they know it's for the better good of the organization.
Right.
And to me, it's how do you influence?
Right.
And that's about relationship building and getting to know the culture that you're in, which takes time. You're
Right.
not making change for change's sake.
Right. Thank you. In terms of motivation and kind of tying into leadership, are there any theories that really stick out to you? Motivational theories,
Yeah.
or theorists that you want to talk about?
There are a few. You know, it's interesting because just like leadership styles, you know, you have, I guess I'll use a gearbox for a car. You know, you have five, depending if you're driving a fast car, maybe you have six different gears. But let's say there are 5 different gears as far as leadership. And you have a democratic approach where you bring everyone in and you listen to them. You have a coaching model where you're talking with someone, you're guiding them. You have, you know, it's something that has to happen right away where you can't get everyone's input this is the way it's going to happen. You know, so you shift gears. When it comes to theorists, as far as motivating people, I don't think there's one in particular that stands out to me, but I think there's a whole hodgepodge of theorists that are out there that I extrapolate a little bit from here, a little bit from there. So whether it's Maslow, you know, if we talk about Maslow and the hierarchy of needs and what does that mean? When I first came here 2 years ago, I think the biggest thing that our staff needed was to be heard and to feel like they were safe.
Mm-hmm.
So if you bring that down to Maslow, you know, those are really, you know, just feeling safe.
And that's what he did, yeah.
And that's what I did.
Yeah.
So it was coming in and establishing those relationships and letting everybody know that, you know, just take a deep breath, relax. And you had 5 different superintendents in 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just figure this all out together. And when you have that, and I look at Maslow, I think there's a lot to be said for that. But as far as motivating others, it's, you know, you can't motivate others, I don't believe, at a school level such as this one. I'll use this one in particular because it is rather small, unless you have those relationships.
Right.
You know, I'm not saying you're best friends with everyone, but, you know, you honor what you're hearing, but you're going to disagree. I think if everyone agreed with each other, it would be a very boring place and
Sure.
nothing would ever change. So that, to me, is much more important than any particular theorist that's out there.
Right.
But there are some that it really doesn't have anything to do with motivational theory that I really lean toward. And I mentioned Maxwell before, I mentioned Jim Collins before, you know, certainly Deming. When you look at what they provide as far as moving organizations forward or moving an idea forward, I really lean on those theorists more than anything.
I think also what we've discussed in the past, one of the good things that the doctoral program does, it opens you up to learn from all these different guys, you know, so you know who you could kind of take, you know, or what to take from which
Sure.
one, and right?
I would agree with that, and I think just as important is, you know, when you're in a class with someone, you have multiple perspectives from those who are
Right.
sitting there. So your peers who are there, coupled with, you know, the professor who's really enabling that learning to take place. When you hear different points of view that you may not have thought about before, and you suspend your judgment or a certainty about something, because, you know, we all have mental models of
Sure.
we think it should be this way, we
Right.
think it should be that way. And so when you listen to others' point, you know, someone says X, whatever the theorist may be, and then you hear other people's, you know, through their lens, what they're taking from that. I grew probably more from hearing other perspectives
Right.
than anything else,
Right.
which was great because the old me was, it's my perspective, and this is the way it should be, as opposed to everyone else's collective, interesting perspectives.
Right. I don't know if it kind of goes with this, but could you just briefly, in the pre-interview session, you talked about the level 5 leadership. Could you just briefly talk about
Well, yeah. So Jim Collins, which I think is here somewhere, actually, no, I have it over there. You know, level 5 leadership, and we did talk about this briefly, is, you know, I'm hoping I can get to a 4. You know, I mean, you know, I'm probably between a 2 and a 3 right now. And, you know, when you read Good to Great and you understand the research behind that book as far as moving organizations forward and what those different attributes organizations should have, and level 5 leadership is like the ultimate leadership level. And I can only think of a very select few who have been there. And I think through your experiences of where you are with certain organizations, coupled with just collective experiences over time may allow a very small percentage to get to that very, very high level of
Right.
leadership. And, you know, without being political, but there are certain ones that I could think of. I think of certainly Lincoln, I believe, is a level 5 leader. I think in many ways Reagan was a level 5 leader. And again, politics aside,
Sure.
when you look at what they were able to accomplish in the times that they were accomplishing such feats, it's something that I aspire to. And will I ever get there? I hope not. If I define success, you know, as your earlier question of, you know, having a roadmap and looking at benchmarks, I think I'm getting there, but I don't know if I'll ever get there because it's such a select few that get there.
Right.
But it's a great book to read at some point if you haven't read it yet.
I thought it was really interesting how you mentioned too that if you are going to get there, it probably will, not you personally, but for anyone, if they ever achieve that great goal, it's probably not going to be till the end of their career.
I would be really, I don't know of any 20-year-old, 30-year-old, even 40-year-old, at least, again, this is based on my experience.
Right, yeah, right,
I mean, maybe others know, others who are younger who achieved that level. But for me, no, I think it'll take me a lifetime to get there.
In class, we've been reading 2 books, The Princessa Machiavelli for Women and also The Art of War. In it, it discusses motivation. In Princessa, she talks about short-term motivation as sort of a dance of give and take.
Yeah.
I give you a little bit, but I try to take a little more back from you, but without you really knowing that I'm taking more.
Yeah.
Would you view?
Very deceptive.
Would you view your short-term motivation in that way? Have you ever done anything like that, or
I guess
is that a little abstract?
Well, no, I guess I have a different spin on it. When I realized that if I'm moving something forward and everyone's at homeostasis, so everyone's very comfortable. You know, it's been like this for 20 years. It's very, you know, we love this book because
Right.
we've been using it for so long.
Right.
That's an
And
example.
I know here you've had to deal with a lot of
of
done it
change
for 20 years and stuff like that. Yeah.
That's right, and that's no disrespect
Yeah.
to the building or to those who worked here, but there was a lot of, you know, well, this is the way it's always been,
Yeah.
and this is the way it should always be.
Yeah.
And then when you ask the more important question, which is this best for kids? The
Right.
answer is no.
Right.
So with that, you know, whatever thing that I'm moving forward, and I'll take the collapsing of the middle school and coming up with an elementary school, a secondary school, and the 2 houses that you know of. We have a humanities house now for secondary, and the math, or the MST house, the Math Science Technology house. It's a radical departure from what we have.
Mm-hmm.
So I know along, you know, for last year that just passed, and even next year, because that's the first year of us phasing this in, just
Sure.
seeing how it'll work. When I look at that continuum, it's a very long answer, but just bear with me. And it goes back to the question you had, is sometimes you need to lose the battle to win the war.
Right.
And that is very, very true.
Right.
So there are points in time where you say to yourself, is it worth it? Is
Right.
it worth it for me to be right? And by the way, I think being right is a disability at times, but anyway. Or to let these short-term, you know, losses that we're looking at, I hate to use, you know, these words of battles and wars,
Right.
but, you know, sometimes you need to lose that battle
Sure.
to get ultimately
Sure.
what you want.
Right.
And so doing that, yeah, I mean, is it deceptive sometimes? I guess it is. But ultimately, like I said, you get the 66% on board because that's what you need to move it forward.
Right.
It's okay. You just need to know, and I think that's what separates level 2, 3, 4, and 5 is you know when to let it go.
Right.
You know when to say, you know what, at this point, I need to let it go. Let's keep our eye on the prize, and the prize is this. And just as important, those of you who are working within your inner circle may want to still fight that battle.
Right.
And then sometimes you need to convince them.
Right.
You know, you need to let it go.
Right. Right.
And that's probably the hardest struggle. Is when you work closely with somebody else and they don't understand that, and you do. You know, sometimes you just have to let nature take its course.
Right.
And for them to go through those different ranges of emotions of, you know, I don't believe this, he doesn't know what he's doing.
Right, yeah, right.
How come he's not doing this? This is wrong.
That's what I was thinking. It must take in you or any leader a strong sense of security in yourself that, hey, these people, and you almost let people think that, oh, you know, he's wrong or this and that, but in order for you to achieve your major goal.
It's
yeah.
true, and I believe Dr. Kelly talks about this too, is your core values. You can't, you can't deviate from your core values, and you can't have too many core values either.
Mhm.
So if the decision-making process and the decisions you're making are based on those core values, it's always the right
It's
decision.
always the right decision. Yeah,
It is.
right. That in terms of long-term motivation, the difference between the two authors is one. In The Art of War, he talks about mainly, Sun Tzu talks about mainly you rule only through fear. Whereas Rubin in Love Versus Justice says you have to bring a little bit of love into the fear.
Sure.
You need both to really lead people. Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I would agree. You know, everything that most of us do, and this is my belief system, when something goes to the extreme this way or this way, usually the result, if it's long term, is not, it doesn't last as long as you want it to. And I think leadership styles are the same thing. If you're always authoritative, or if you're always wishy-washy, it's not a good way to go.
Right.
So for me, it's always about finding that balance. And you find that balance because you know within a school year, there's an ebb and flow to the school
Sure.
year, and things are situational in nature. And so when you go through your 5 years of, is it time for me democratic, is it time for me to be authoritative, is it time to me to coach, is it time for me to whatever it may be, you can balance those out. I mean, fear, you know, I'm not a big fan of, you know, ruling by fear, because I think you'll get a short-term result, but it won't be long-lasting.
The pushback, right?
You could, I mean, you know, listen, Brian, you need to do this because if you don't, I'm going to fire you. You know, okay, well,
Yeah,
I'll do it.
But yeah.
But I don't know if you're going to have the ultimate buy-in. You're doing it just because you're scared.
Right.
Ultimately, what I would like to see is, you know, through that journey of long-term, which I believe your question is talking about, is you need to find that balance between, you know, sometimes you need to let everyone know. You know, again, I go back to John Cotter and his Iceberg is Melting book, and how you get change within the school to move something forward when people don't want to. And I call it the Hynes effect. Usually when you want to change something, people do this, like a statue. It's like, I can't do that. Sometimes you have to have a little bit of fear in the sense of, we need to do this now, because if we don't, this is what's going to happen.
Right.
Or the state will do this, and that's probably the few times I would ever use the state as you know, as an example. But it's very situational, and then over time, it's important that you show everyone who's working together short-term wins.
Right.
You know,
Without a doubt.
as simple as they are, and celebrate those short-term wins until you get to where you need to be.
Right.
And that's where that balance comes in.
Right.
Because if you're always driving fear in someone, they won't notice those short-term wins. Because they're so worried about, am I going to get fired?
Right.
Or is something going to happen to me?
Right.
And that's not the way you want to operate.
Sure. Yeah, without a doubt. And just to wrap it up a little bit here, you know, you probably better than anyone could tell us any advice that you could give to, you know, being the guy that went through the program and being a guy where you are now. Any advice you could give the current students as we're now starting our second year? See the light a little bit at the end.
Is it advice to become an administrator or advice because of the program?
I think both. If you want to talk about,
I'll do the program first.
Yeah, program,
Okay.
and maybe even life experience.
Well, let me talk about my experience. And I had James Bruscia as he was unbelievable. He really, you know, just mapped everything out for me too. Aside from Dr. and Sarah, and I had others on board too, you know, but specifically, you know, Dr. Bruscia, who's no longer there, he used to call me the Lone Ranger. And that's not good, even though the movie's coming out. If you work by yourself, because I was used to doing everything by myself, that he would call me the Lone Ranger. And if you are going to be the Lone Ranger, you will be in trouble. And so my advice for those who are going through the program now is to not do things in isolation, to talk amongst your peers, certainly tap into the collective wisdom of the Dowling staff that's there, and ask lots of questions. And if you can, figure out what you want your focus to be as far as your research as early as possible. It's so important because it's nothing worth, especially because of all those assignments that you have. If you can actually work on those assignments that are research-based, that are really constructed around your research.
Mhm.
You know, you're getting a lot of those things out of it.
Sure.
And to be organized. I mean, you know, one of the hardest things I think for one to learn is that when your off time is probably when you should be doing the most work.
Right.
You're recharging your
Right.
batteries in some way, but in many ways you want to do some work to get ready for that next phase that you're moving into.
Right.
So that's probably the best advice I can give you. The Lone Ranger, you know, I still, you know, that's in my DNA, unfortunately. So, you know, sometimes I have solar flares where I still come out being the Lone Ranger, and usually it gets me into trouble. As far as administration is concerned, first of all, you need to, if you cross over to the dark side of administration, you have to be sure that you want to leave. If you're leaving the area of teaching, I'm just going to talk about teaching, because once you leave teaching, you almost go through that grieving process.
Sure. Yeah.
You know, of my kids and my
Right.
content area, which I love very much. And if you're okay with that decision, then I can't think of a better job than becoming an administrator.
Right.
Because instead of having your X amount of kids within your classes, or one classroom if you're an elementary teacher, you have the whole school that is your classroom.
Right.
And you have your vision, what you think your kids deserve, designing things to get your kids to where they need to be, and working with others. It's a very satisfying career. But
just a common theme I think I seem to hear on most of these answers is whether you're a teacher, a principal, assistant principal, superintendent, the number one goal obviously always is what's best for the kid, right?
it's what's best for kids. I mean, it really is. And sometimes, I bet you, if you ask 25 superintendents, if they sat in this very small table, what is best for kids, you'll probably have 25 different answers.
Right.
You know, so as simple as that question is, and that comes down to your core values. What do you think is best for kids? What do I think is best for kids? And we'll probably have different answers. But if your staff has different answers, everyone has to have the same one. Has to
Sure.
have the same message.
Sure.
So my hope is, at least at this point, is our building knows what's best for kids, because we're moving in that direction. And so you have that consistency throughout. And so it's I'm only halfway through probably my career at this point, and it's very satisfying, and I really attribute much of my success to the doctoral program and to the professors I've worked with.
That's
They were
really
phenomenal.
nice. That is really nice. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Hynes.
Thank
It's
you.
been a pleasure. Really informative stuff, and we'll see you shortly.
Okay, thank you.